Hello everyone, I just got back from an early screening of Together starring Dave Franco and Alison Brie. The real life couple are playing a couple in this horror movie, this body horror movie about codependency. Now, if you've seen the posters of this movie, you can probably figure out where it's heading. But on top of that, the posters for this movie were incredible. The trailer for this movie was fantastic. I was looking forward to this movie. I wasn't expecting sort of like an A24 elevated, like real sophisticated horror, but I was thinking it would be a pretty well-made, good time. And overall, I did have a good time with it. I actually get why this movie has an 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. You will be hard-pressed to find someone who doesn't like this movie. In saying that, though, I don't think this is the best horror movie of the year. I don't think this is the next body horror masterpiece like The Substance, but I do think it's pretty solid. So today I'm going to give a spoiler-free review and recommendation, and then the bulk of this video will be an in-depth spoiler breakdown, getting into the things I love, getting into the things I didn't love, character analysis, all of that. So let's get straight into it. So the story centers around essentially a couple navigating a body horror problem. I will not give anything away more than that, but again, looking at the posters and the trailer, you can quickly figure out what this is. It's two people. It's essentially a bottle movie. It does leave the house occasionally, but yeah, it's this couple that are kind of on the rocks, kind of in a bad place in their relationship, dealing with this situation that is horrifying. That's all I'm going to say. And in that, you get some really, really good body horror stuff, all right? Like, just conceptually speaking, again, this doesn't really touch the substance, but on top of this, this doesn't really touch the intensity of the gory scenes from Bring Her Back. This is quite tame. Where I think this movie really shines is conceptually. I think even though it isn't that horrific in its actual, like, visual language, I think the concepts at play here are really compelling and interesting. In order to really get in depth on that, I will need you to stick around for the spoiler talk, but I'll leave it at that. The performances here are mostly really good. Alison Brie is always fantastic, and Dave Franco is also a really good actor. However, I think some of the writing for Dave Franco's character is not doing him any favors. There are a few lines of dialogue and a few moments where I couldn't tell whether it was a bad performance or just some of the writing here was really clunky. And that was the big thing for me with this movie. It rides at a solid, like a really solid 7 out of 10, but there are so many moments where it feels like it's reaching for something greater. Again, like I said, it is trying to be a commentary on codependency in relationships and also the importance of sex and physical touch and connection. But this is a movie that feels like it had a studio breathing down its neck, being like, oh, make sure you explain this, or don't go too far in this direction or that direction. I would have loved a further exploration into this couple, into the sticky dynamics, really let us sit in these fights, sit in these moments. So after the movie ends, we can have a big discussion around the relationship and not just the body horror, you know, how the body horror actually informs the relationship and how the relationship informs the body horror. I was kind of expecting this to function a little like Midsommar, where yes, there's horror stuff to talk about, but also you're just as interested in talking about the relationship and what's going on between these characters. But unfortunately, for a movie about codependency and this relationship in a hard spot, I found a lot of the stuff really cut and dry between the couple, and I found both characters were actually lacking depth. There's a horrific thing, a horrific backstory for one of the characters, but you kind of have to keep reminding yourself that they went through that because it's not particularly felt in the script throughout the movie. You kind of forget about it because the characters are kind of just going through the motions, whereas you look to something like Midsommar, and I will be referencing that movie and a couple others because it feels like this movie is constantly referencing that, but you look at Midsommar and there's just something so perfectly executed about that initial introduction where you get a feel for Christian and his friends and how they see Danny, and you get a feel for Danny and her friends and how they see Christian. Horrific event and into the movie. And I felt like in Together, I was constantly sitting there waiting to get a really proper feel for these characters and what makes them tick. You do get little moments that are neat, but overall, I can't really make too many judgments on these characters and their relationship that doesn't feel like I'm maybe missing some character context, and not in a good way, kind of in a frustrating way. And again, the body horror here is good. I think it will be a crowd-pleasing movie. But unfortunately, I think this movie is closer in tone and execution to, say, Final Destination Bloodlines, when I feel like it could have been closer in execution to a Bring Her Back or Hereditary. It does feel like it when we're going to have kind of dumb fun with this horror concept with occasional moments of greatness, whereas I think it really could have gone in the other direction if it wanted to. And that's something I just need to come to terms with. But unfortunately, while I was watching the movie, I was sitting there thinking, you know what, I'm having a pretty good time with this. It's doing things pretty well, but unfortunately, unless people are interested, I am not going going to run out and tell them to see it, unlike something like The Substance. If you are really interested in this movie, you'll definitely enjoy it. You'll definitely have a good time. And there's occasional moments of brilliance. The big thing I can compliment this movie on is when it's doing generic horror, not body horror, generic horror stuff, it's surprisingly good. Like, the director was fucking cooking, all right? There in the initial introduction, you have some dream sequences. I won't spoil anything, but you have some dream sequences where someone's in bed or thinking about what their partner's thinking, and they are so effective and so well done. And there's no jump scares either. It makes you sit in this uncomfortable silence with incredible sound design. I was like, we're onto something great here. And then the rest of the movie was just like pretty good. But it was just one of those movies where it's constantly almost perfect, almost awesome. But by the end of the movie, when it's all coming together, all crashing down, I was like, I just wish I knew more about these characters, and I wish I could make judgment calls, and I wish I had more to talk about with people afterwards. But unfortunately, what we were talking about was like essentially how this movie is good, a pretty good time, but could have been absolutely amazing. So let's get into spoiler talk. We're going to break down all the characters, my favorite moments, get into the nitty gritty of what works in this movie and what doesn't. Leave now. 3, 2, 1, spoilers. Brief intermission. Please consider getting a membership to this channel. Links for both Patreon and YouTube membership, whichever one you prefer, are down in the description below. Every 2 weeks, I do a podcast talking about every single show or movie I've watched in a given fortnight. It costs the price of a cup of coffee, and it really helps out the channel. Thank you so much, and back to the video. All right, so the introduction had me nervous. The character writing, the way the friends were talking, again, it felt like bad Midsommar. The dialogue for the friends basically being like, man, I thought you were gonna be like really cool when you started dating my sister, but actually it turns out you're just living in her shadow. I was like, okay, I know we need to effectively communicate this, but this is rough. That scene in itself should have been 20 minutes, subtle dialogue, good conversations, and similar for Alison Brie's character, just like, man, you need to get a boyfriend who actually is going to have sex with you. I mean, what's going on there? And it was just laying down its cards so transparently. And again, I know this might just be going for a fun, crowd-pleasing movie, but this is setting the tone for the movie, which is a shame because very quickly we get into these incredible dream sequences. And those were the things I was praising before. You have this incredible dream sequence with Dave Franco where he imagines his girlfriend next to him, Alison Brie, basically like talking in her sleep, but like really, really confidently about like how his resentment is short-sighted just because he's a failure. And it reminds me of this YouTube video from Little Joel or Big Joel, one of those Little Joel channels, where he talked about the horror of the person that sleeps next to you being really into weird things and just like, do you ever really know the person sleeping next to you? And it reminded me of the horrifying parts of that video because, yeah, there's just something so eerie about the person next to you just unannounced, randomly like chewing you out in like this ominous tone. It was perfect. And on top of that, then the way he imagines his parents across from him looking at him. And again, this feels like biting Midsommar a bit, but the backstory we get about what happened to his parents is similarly horrific. But where I think this movie fumbles is you are told this horrific backstory about how his dad, I think, took his own life and then the mum couldn't deal with it. So just sat in the bed with his decomposing body and like smiled at him. It's this horrific backstory, but throughout the movie, you almost forget, you know, like the movie doesn't seem to really explore this. Dave Franco is portrayed as just kind of generally sad, and the way Alison Brie navigates, and that might be the point, right? She is rather dismissive of Dave Franco's character, but I don't know, just something about the writing here. I had to keep reminding myself of what he went, and not in a way that felt like an intentional parallel to what we were seeing with Alison Brie and Dave Franco. That was my big thing with this movie. I think it set up a lot of really exciting stuff, good ideas, like real cooking ideas. Like I loved the opening with the dogs, and even just the sound design with the dogs morphing together was really horrific and uncomfortable in a way that feels intimate and really relatable. Again, like the moment where his girlfriend seemingly talking in his sleep, but somehow she composes this awful statement that just lands. And I also do appreciate, I think this movie is playing with gender dynamics. Usually in these horror movies, it's the woman in the relationship not being believed by her partner, being like, hey, like there's this thing going on. I need you to believe me. Please, 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 please. In this one, it's Dave Franco. Dave Franco is also the financial dependent. I think he's the less successful financially of the two. It feels like they have played with gender expectations to a degree. On top of that, Alison Brie is the one that wants to have sex more often, and he seems less interested. Again, feels like a bit of a gender swap. And I was really loving what the movie was doing at the start when Alison Brie proposes to Dave Franco. Like, again, a gender swap, but also I was just seeing there, and the way that goes down, to me, it felt like a bit of a rude engagement, dare I say, which I know is a crazy thing to say, but in that moment, yes, she's being vulnerable, but I was also like, this is a really awkward, clunky way to propose. You don't have a ring, which I guess is fine, but like, of course he's going to have a little bit of a reaction, but it is indicative of a relationship that is on the rocks for sure. At the same time, throughout the movie, I think, yes, Dave Franco clearly had some growing up to do, but also, I don't know about that. Like, he has been through a horrific, not just like his parents dying a normal death, like an absolutely insanely horrific thing. And I know the movie seems to be suggesting that they both have work to do, but I did think, truthfully, Alison Brie was a bit self-involved and a bit dismissive, and I'm wondering if there's a fine line. I will be really curious what people make of the central conflict and the dynamic between these two characters. Even though I don't think it was properly fleshed out and explored, I am curious to see what people say, because I do think if it was gender swapped and if it was Dave Franco coming up to Alison Brie when she's clearly grieving and mourning and a bit, frankly, depressed after her parents' horrific demise, I think it would land a bit differently if Dave Franco was like, we're not having sex, what the fuck, all right? But in saying that, I think this setup is good enough for where the movie's going, which is, again, these people that aren't exactly compatible right now being forced together, all right? They've drunk this water they shouldn't have drunk, and they've been cursed by this like epic Greek myth parallel. I think it's a really cool idea when we find out what's actually there. But the big thing I loved about this movie, because I've been talking shit on it, I love the idea that the horrifying journey they're going to take to merge into one is actually low-key, in some ways, a positive. Hear me out on this one, all right? At a certain point, we get an exposition dumb character, right? The teacher. And he says that, there's this like great Greek philosopher that said that like, when we initially existed, we actually had 2 heads and 4 arms and 4 legs. And then another god was like, that's way too much power. We're going to cut people down the middle. Hence why we're always looking for our other half, all right? And he's like, if you can actually find your other half and you're able to merge, like you can't let that go. And you find out that the teacher has also done that merge. You also find out in this moment that the teacher, there is a dominant person out of the teacher. He looks much more like one of those members of the relationship he was in before they did the merge, all right? So essentially, someone's been through this cycle before successfully. For those of you who haven't seen it, and explains what's going to happen to Alison Brie and Dave Franco. And I was sitting there being like, okay, Alison Brie definitely wears the pants here. Dave Franco is the more keen one. He is clearly the chaser in this dynamic. And even though she proposed to him, it's kind of because he was looking for a way out of life, not just of this relationship. Like, he has self-deletion tendencies. Not only was he not really into the relationship, he wasn't into existence in general. And I do think Alison Brie, circling back, I do think Alison Brie was a bit dismissive. Yes, okay, like he doesn't want to have sex with you and he's a bit cold about it. But at the same time, at the point where he's drinking alcohol, looking sad over a computer, and clearly a broken dude with tears in his eyes, like, I don't know, I was waiting for Alison Brie to at least check in slightly, but they both had communication issues, and Dave Franco was definitely a bit sulky, but I mean, can you really blame him? But circling back, I think the ending and them coming together is where this movie really actually does something well. I think it really meets and executes its premise. I really like the idea that even though Alison Brie and Dave Franco have all these communication issues, emotionally they aren't perfect, the way they navigate conflict isn't great, like they clearly have some problems and they've clearly lost and forgotten why they love each other so much. I love the idea that somehow they are a perfect match. They are a perfect pair. They are able to go through this. It's not going to get fucked up the way the dogs did or the people in the cave did. It's actually going to go well. And that means on this like mythic level, they are right for each other. Even if we can't understand it in our world, it works. They will form and come together to be this better being. And I think that's really interesting. Again, like obviously it's horrifying and they're losing their autonomy, but at the same time, Alison Brie is clearly the more authoritative one in the relationship. She is the stronger one. Yeah, she was a bit curt and a bit dismissive. So maybe when they merge as one, she can take some of Dave Franco's softness. Who knows? But at the same time, I think it's really interesting that Dave Franco had essentially, it is revealed to us that was kind of keen on leaving existence, leaving this planet, right? Taking himself out of the equation. And now together, he won't need to do that as much, right? Like they are joining in this way that I found really interesting. And the reveal of this androgynous, but predominantly Alison Brie appearing person was really interesting. Again, with that teacher, I was like, oh, he looks like way more than one of them than the other. And I love the reveal here that, yeah, essentially Alison Brie has consumed Dave Franco. There is a bit of a mix going on, but it is mostly Alison Brie. They've essentially made their own child and turned into their own child. And I think the concepts at play here are really good. My only issue is you have a moment like before they merge where Dave Franco has a knife in his kind of waistband and you think he's going to self-delete, and instead he goes for the proposal. And I almost rolled my eyes in the back of my head. And the reason I say that is I just didn't know these characters well enough. The big thing I was missing here for a movie that is all about codependency and a toxic relationship, or just a relationship in general that's rocky, I wanted to sit there and really get a feel for these characters. I do think Alison Brie's writing doesn't pass the Bechdel test, and that's okay sometimes. I'm not furious at it, but I think, yeah, compared to Dave Franco, who has this insane backstory and we get a lot of time exploring his mental health and all these things going on, I think for a movie that is clearly positioning itself as a movie that is equal parts Dave Franco and Alison Brie, a co-lead sort of movie, I thought Alison Brie's character development really just was how she feels about the teacher that may or may not be flirting with her and how she feels about Dave Franco. So as it stands, in a lot of these arguments, I just kind of read it as, yeah, Alison Brie is a bit harsh on Dave Franco, and Dave Franco probably needs to be a bit more transparent about how much he's grieving, how much he's mourning, and how he can't exactly show up to her. I guess I wish I was looking for a movie where I just had a bit more to chew on. I want to be able to sit there with people afterwards. I want to be able to sit there with my fiance and be like, okay, well, how'd you feel about this? Did you feel about that? Blah, 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 blah. But the conversations around this couple were very straightforward and easy. We were both just kind of okay, Dave Franco could have communicated a bit better and clearer about his struggles, and Alison Brie could have been a bit nicer in general, and that's it. Circling back to things I did I like that this movie had a sexual component to it. I just wish we got more. I did like that they're in a relationship that's essentially going through a dead bedroom phase, and they're not sleeping together, and while they're not sleeping together, well, Dave Franco is literally either not wanting to or physically can't be up to the task, this supernatural thing is forcing them together. I think you could have really gone further with this. I think a movie that felt less studio kind of meddled with, or less kind of we need to appeal as many people as possible, could have actually really veered into interesting directions. You could have had a scene where either Alison Brie or Dave Franco are gonna pleasure themselves and their hand just won't do it. You could have had her sliding her hand down her pants, or him doing the same, and the hand just flings up and would rather on a instinctual level is trying to drag them over the partner that they don't want to sleep with. And you could have really, the same way Alien, for example, is this commentary on invasion of consent, you really could have gone for something horrific and gross. How do you deal with not wanting to sleep with someone, not wanting to be intimate with someone, while also sliding into their skin? And yes, all of this is there on paper, but I just want to feel it more. I really want to feel, even if the point isn't that they're a toxic couple, even if the point is, as the ending suggests, they are kind of physically compatible and spiritually compatible, and a pair that not many people can actually be to actually healthily merge together. I would have loved to sit in that tension of a couple that isn't ready to make peace with that, a couple that isn't ready to admit that to one another. But as it stands, the writing and the arguments just felt really paper thin. And again, that sexual component, we do get a great scene at the school where they have sex. It's not quite a misread, but essentially he's thirsting for her on this body horror level, and they start having sex and then they get caught together. But I feel in another movie, this would have been an absolute show stealer. You know, this would have been the scene that everyone talks about. This would have been a scene where everyone's like, oh my God. Whoa. But as it stands, it's just kind of like, okay, yeah, like that probably would have hurt a bit. Like there's something about the way the body horror is executed where it's still clearly trying to be light and not too full on. And I think the movie really could have gone for it. This will not get reactions the way certain scenes in Bring Her Back or Talk to Me did. And I think that's a shame, and definitely not the way The Substance did. And I think that's a shame. I think it could have had one or two of those moments. But more so to the point is, this brings up another issue with the writing where it's like she pushes him off at one point, right? And he says like, hey, like I'm stuck in you. That's really going to hurt. And she just does it anyway. She gives him a look. She says sorry when she's clearly not sorry and just does it. And you can see he's a bit shocked there. Again, it leans back into this sort of thing of gender dynamics that feel a bit flipped. This is a moment of intimacy where it feels like his kind, like he wasn't exactly, he felt like something was rushed. He felt like it wasn't done on mutual terms. And you can see a sense of betrayal in his eyes. And I've seen reviews talk about the fact that this movie doesn't over-explain things and we'll just cut to the next scene and we fill in the gaps ourselves in a really fascinating way. I kind of disagree. I think this movie, I would have loved if we got a scene where they, have a big argument or discussion about it, where he's like, hey, you didn't really listen to what I was saying there. Like, I didn't really appreciate that. I would have loved if we figured that out another way. Then maybe she brings up like a sexual escapade they had a couple of years ago where he was a bit pushy or he didn't listen to her or whatever, you know? Like, I thought the whole movie was going to be like, okay, this body horror thing brings out the worst in these people and they have to work through all the unspoken things in the relationship before they can actually heal from the trauma they have between them and connect. And I don't think the movie pulled that off. Yes, they do connect, and yes, they are a perfect pair. But I think what we were missing is I would have taken straight up an extra hour. I would have had an extra hour of just, you know, what this body horror brings up, you know, like, okay, like maybe it forces Dave Franco, like let's say we go with that masturbation scene I was talking about earlier, maybe you have one of the characters going to do that, and then while it's forcing their hand away, the other one flies into the room, sees that, oh, you're not sleeping with me, but you're going to pull up porn on the computer, and then they have a whole argument and it brings up this and that and the other and the other, and, you know, again, maybe you actually have one of them considering cheating with the other one, and then brings up conversations. Again, the moment where he's pushed out of her, literally pushed out of her in the bathroom stall, could have been such a great opportunity for like, okay, you didn't respect me here, or like, are we really going to talk about rushing things? How about you rushing me into XYZ? Like, I just think this movie is really solid. It's a solid 7 out of 10, but we really could have had a fantastic movie that actually could have had people talking in the whole car ride home being like, nah, that was a bit unfair. That was a bit this. As it stands, like, I mean, the people I saw it with, we were all locked in. We're all sitting there. We're all expecting like a really solid movie. And we went, yeah, it was a bit of fun. And the main thing we were talking about is just how we were kind of left wanting more. And it was pretty good. And I hate to be that guy, you know, like I want to be able to have fun with movies. And I did have fun with this movie, but I think it's a fantastic premise with okay execution. I think some of the performances are a bit clunky. The music is low-key bad. And I just think we could have had a real tight movie here. And as it stands, I feel like it could have been a bit shorter and a bit more just fun, slappy, goofy, and then I wouldn't have taken it more seriously. But that moment where Dave Franco went for the proposal and I felt nothing, I wasn't sitting there like, oh, sweet, they've worked through their pain. What a shame they're doing it right before they're about to turn into this globby, gloopy thing. But I also wasn't sitting there being like, oh, no, you guys are awful for each other. You know, my issue isn't that they aren't the worst couple in the world and they should have been awful and nasty the whole time. My issue is I don't know how I feel about them, and I don't really care about them one way or the other. I don't see Dave Franco becoming part of Alison Brie, because Alison Brie is clearly visually the dominant personality, and she was the dominant personality in the relationship before they merged. But when they merged, she is clearly probably going to be riding the ship, right? I think she even says to the parents like, hey guys, or something. So the big thing here is I'm not sitting there being like, oh, what a shame Dave Franco had so much to offer, or he was going to get over his thing or whatever. Like, I don't really feel any which way about it. And I also don't feel any which way about Alison Brie maybe losing her autonomy or anything. I'm just kind of like, okay, and I wish I cared about these characters more. I wish I wanted them both to be better or both to figure it out or anything, but it's just kind of, you just can't see in their watch yet. And so when Dave Franco's proposing, I wasn't like, oh, what a shame it's so late, or oh, they finally got there. Oh, cute. I'm also not sitting there being like, no, you guys are terrible. I was just kind of like, okay, on with the body horror, please. And the body horror is cool. The ending is great. But yeah, some of the writing in this movie was just shocking. Like when Alison Brie calls her friend, and the friend's like, man, have you guys had a good time anytime recently? Like, when was the last time? Oh, okay. Like, it's just very clunkily written. And there was it does feel like it's taking from so many different movies. The Thing, The Substance, Midsommar, like, and on top of that, it doesn't feel like it's doing too much new or well. It just feels like, you kind of like a bunch of movies and someone gave you money and you plopped it in. And the only thing I'm really high off about this movie is the way those dream sequences were executed. Weirdly enough, the body horror is fine. I think when they actually come together, it's great. And I love that it feels good while they're doing it. Again, leaning back to that sexual component, I love that, like, it feels good and it feels right to them. That's awesome. But yeah, the only thing that really jumped out to me were those dream sequences. Everything else, I was kind of like, yeah, this is good enough. This feels like kind of average horror movie with a really good idea, and I just wish I was feeling more throughout it. But yeah, look, if you're interested, go see it. This isn't a negative review. This is like a 7 out of 10. And I just think it could have been a lot better. Given the potential of the premise, given the cast, yeah, I just think it could have been a little tight. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Brief intermission. Please consider getting a membership to this channel. Links for both Patreon and YouTube membership, whichever one you prefer, are down in the description below. Every 2 weeks, I do a podcast talking about every single show or movie I've watched in a given fortnight. It costs the price of a cup of coffee, and it really helps out. Thank you so much, and have a lovely day.